I hate my life, I hate my kid, and I resent everyone who convinced me to have a family. I hate my life, I hate my kid, I resent my family, I resent my in-laws, I resent my wife, and above all, I hate myself. When I was younger, I never had any desire to have kids. I wasn't one of those people who vehemently opposed parenthood, but it was never something I actively wanted. My answer to the question was always, maybe one day, maybe not, and that was enough for me. My wife knew this about me from the beginning. When we were engaged, I told her the truth. Maybe one, definitely not more. For a while, that answer seemed to suffice. Life moved along, and we were happy just the two of us. Then, as the years passed, I watched as my friends started having kids. At first, I was indifferent, but the more I saw what parenthood entailed, the more I leaned heavily against having children. Sure, some parents had great kids, well-behaved and sweet, but for every easy child, there were just as many difficult ones. Even the good kids seemed like a lot of work. Endless diapers, sleepless nights, temper tantrums, and constant demands. I knew then, without a doubt, that being a parent wasn't for me. Then, tragedy struck. My wife's sister passed away unexpectedly. It was a devastating loss for the entire family, and understandably, it shifted my wife's perspective on what truly mattered. All of a sudden, family became her #1 priority. She talked about legacy, about the importance of continuing the family line. I got that. I understood why, after losing her sister, she would feel this overwhelming desire to create something permanent, something lasting. I could see why she wanted kids. But I didn't. At this point, I was firm in my decision. My answer was no to kids. Not just a soft maybe anymore, but a clear, hard no. I didn't want the responsibility, the pressure, or the loss of freedom. I saw what kids did to relationships, how they drained energy, how they consumed lives. It wasn't for me, and I was sure of it. But my wife wouldn't let it go. She pushed, and every conversation seemed to circle back to the same topic: kids. I tried to stand my ground, but every time she brought it up, I felt the pressure building. I loved my wife, and I didn't want to be the reason she was unhappy or unfulfilled. Eventually, after what felt like endless conversations and emotional pleas, I caved. The tipping point? The promise that changed everything. My in-laws, my wife's parents, jumped into the conversation. They made all these promises, how they'd help, how they'd sell their ranch and move down the street from us so that they could be close by. They said they'd be involved, hands-on grandparents, and that I wouldn't have to give up my entire life to raise a child. My wife and her parents painted this picture of family bliss, where they'd do the hard stuff, where I'd just be the dad, providing and playing a role that sounded more like something out of a 1950s sitcom. I wouldn't have to deal with the day-to-day chaos. They had it all covered. They convinced me. I was an idiot for letting them. I was so naive to think that it would work out the way they promised. But at the time, it sounded reasonable. Her parents were in their 50s, healthy, and full of energy. They swore they'd be there every step of the way, even beyond the baby phase, to help with whatever we needed. I caved. I agreed to have a kid, and I regret it more than anything else in my life. Fast forward 11 years, and here I am, trapped in a life I despise, married with a child who makes my life miserable every single day. My son has been diagnosed with ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. For those unfamiliar, it's just a fancy term for a kid being an asshole. He's defiant, cruel, and seems to take pleasure in causing chaos. There's nothing else wrong with him, no communication issues, no sensitivity to stimuli, nothing that would make you think he behaves this way because of something he can't control. He's just mean. The diagnosis basically confirms what I already knew. My kid is vindictive. He seeks conflict just for the sake of it. And no, this isn't some lack of discipline or bad parenting issue. I've read every book, gone to every parenting class, shelled out thousands upon thousands of dollars for therapy, behaviorists, and counselors. You name it. We've tried it. And yet, here we are, 11 years later, with a kid who continues to act out in ways that leave me seething with anger and frustration. And remember those promises my wife's parents made? The ones about how they'd be there, how they'd help us raise this kid they so desperately wanted? Yeah, well, that was a lie. They bailed almost immediately. When our son started showing signs of being difficult, throwing tantrums, being stubborn, acting out, they quickly realized he wasn't the sweet, easy grandchild they'd envisioned. For the first few years, they helped a little, but by the time he was 5, they had completely washed their hands of him. They see him once a month, maybe, and that's only if we force the issue. They don't want to deal with him. He's too much for them, too much energy, too much defiance, too much everything. So now, instead of the village they promised, it's just me and my wife, struggling to keep our heads above water while raising a kid who seems hell-bent on making our lives miserable. The worst part is, I can't blame anyone but myself. I let them convince me. I knew I didn't want kids, and yet I let myself be swayed. Now I'm paying the price, and so is my son, in a way. Because deep down, I know that part of the reason he's so defiant, so angry, is because I never wanted him in the first place. I've tried to hide it, to be a good dad, but kids can sense these things. They know when they're unwanted. And now I'm stuck in a life I never wanted, with a kid I can barely tolerate. I hate saying that. I hate even thinking it. But it's the truth. I feel trapped in this endless cycle of resentment, frustration, and regret. Every day feels like a battle, and I'm losing. I can't even stand to be in my own house half the time. Tonight was the breaking point. After another long day at work, I came home, hoping for just a few moments of peace before the usual chaos started. But the moment I walked through the door, I could sense something was off. My son was standing by the front window, glaring out into the street. He had that look on his face, the one that told me he was already angry, already looking for a reason to lash out. "What's going on?" I asked, already exhausted. "They took my package," he snapped, pointing to the neighbor's house. "My Amazon package got delivered to their house this morning, and they didn't give it to me until now." I sighed. It was a mistake. They didn't take your package on purpose. You have it now, so what's the problem? He just glared at me, his face twisted with anger. They waited all day to give it to me. They knew it was mine, and they didn't bring it over until after dinner. They wanted to mess with me. I tried to reason with him, to explain that the neighbors probably hadn't even realized the package was his until later in the day, but he wasn't having it. In his mind, they had wronged him, and he wanted revenge. That's when I saw it. He had spit on the neighbor's door handle, not just once, but multiple times. He was standing by the window, watching to see when they would come out and touch the handle, completely unfazed by the fact that what he was doing was wrong. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, unable to contain my frustration. He turned to me with that defiant smirk I've come to know all too well. "I want them to get sick," he said, like it was the most logical thing in the world. "They deserve it for messing with my package." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt a wave of anger wash over me, and before I could stop myself, I was yelling. I told him to clean it up, to apologize, to stop acting like a complete psychopath. But instead of listening, instead of even acknowledging that what he had done was wrong, he just stormed off, slamming the door to his room behind him. I stood there, shaking with rage. I couldn't believe that this was my life, that this was my kid. How had things gotten so bad? How had I ended up here, in this constant state of conflict, of anger, of hopelessness? But it didn't end there. Of course, it didn't. A few minutes later, I heard him stomping around upstairs. I didn't think much of it at first, but then I heard something else, something that made my blood run cold. It was the sound of liquid hitting the floor. I ran upstairs and found him in the attic, standing over a box. My box. The one thing I had left from my parents, who both died when I was young. A single banker's box filled with memorabilia, photos, and keepsakes. and he was peeing on it. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, watching in horror as he destroyed the only tangible connection I had to my parents. When he was finished, he looked up at me with that same defiant expression, like he knew exactly what he had done and didn't care. He had done it on purpose. He had done it to hurt me. I don't remember what I said. I don't even remember how I got out of the house. All I know is that the next thing I knew, I was sitting in my car, parked in the lot of a dark, empty park. I had left. I had just walked out and driven away, unable to deal with it for one more second. I don't know if I'm going back. Part of me doesn't want to. As I sit here in the silence of my car, the reality of my situation weighs down on me like a ton of bricks. I'm 45 years old, crying in a parking lot because my life has spiraled so far out of control that I don't even recognize it anymore. I'm filled with rage, regret, and this deep, gnawing sadness that I can't shake. I blame myself for all of it. I should have stood my ground. I should have trusted my instincts and never agreed to have a child. I knew deep down that I wasn't cut out for this, that I didn't want this life, but I let myself be convinced. I let my wife, her parents, and the idea of some perfect, happy family push me into something I never wanted, and now I'm paying the price. But it's not just me. My son is paying the price too. He didn't ask to be born into this mess. He didn't choose to have parents who never truly wanted him. And as much as I resent him, as much as I hate what my life has become because of him, I know it's not his fault. Not entirely. He's just a kid, a product of the environment we created for him. And I failed him. I thought that maybe, just maybe, I could be a good dad even if I didn't want kids. That I could fake it. That I could learn to love the role. But I was wrong. I've been going through the motions for 11 years, trying to be the dad I'm supposed to be, but I never truly committed. And kids know. They always know when they're unwanted. And that's the part that haunts me. I never truly wanted my son, and I think, deep down, he knows it. It doesn't matter how many times I've tried to hide my resentment, how many times I've tried to be the good dad I thought I could fake. Kids sense these things, and my son sensed it from the beginning. Maybe that's why he's so angry, so defiant. Maybe that's why he goes out of his way to hurt me, to test me. He knows I don't want to be here, that I never did. I've spent years in therapy, hoping that somehow it would change things, hoping that it would make me a better father, a better husband, a better person. I've poured money into behaviorists, counselors, parenting classes, anything that promised even the smallest glimmer of hope. But no matter how many books I read, no matter how many professionals we consulted, nothing seemed to make a difference. The anger, the defiance, the constant conflict, it never stopped. It never even slowed down. If anything, it got worse with time. Every day feels like a fight to get my son out of bed, a fight to get him to go to school, a fight to get him to do the most basic things like brushing his teeth or eating dinner. Everything is a battle, and I'm tired. I'm so tired. I've been fighting for 11 years, and I don't know how much longer I can keep going. And the worst part? My wife and her parents, the ones who promised they'd be there, the ones who swore they'd help, they're nowhere to be found. My wife tries, but she's just as exhausted as I am, and her patience wears thin faster and faster each day. We've grown apart over the years, slowly but steadily. The tension between us is palpable, but neither of us has the energy to address it. It's easier to just coexist in silence, focusing all our attention on managing the chaos our son creates, rather than dealing with the issues in our marriage. As for her parents, the ones who promised to be the village we needed to raise this child, they're gone. Oh, they're still physically around, living just down the street like they said they would, but they haven't been involved in our lives for years. When our son started showing signs of being difficult, throwing tantrums, hitting other kids, acting out, they slowly distanced themselves. They didn't want to deal with it. He was too much for them, and they made excuse after excuse until eventually they stopped offering help altogether. The people who convinced me to have this child, the ones who swore they'd be there to help, bailed the moment things got hard. And I'm left to pick up the pieces. I'm left to deal with the fallout of a decision I never truly wanted to make, with no support from the people who pushed me into it in the first place. There are days when I wonder what my life would have been like if I had stood my ground. If I had said no and stuck to it. Maybe I'd be happy. Maybe I'd be living the life I wanted, free from the constant stress, the endless arguments, the feeling of being trapped in a life that isn't mine. But I didn't say no. I caved. I let my wife, her family, and the pressure of societal expectations push me into a role I never wanted, and now I'm stuck. There's no going back. I made my bed, and now I have to lie in it. Except, I don't know if I can anymore. As I sit here in my car, staring out at the empty park, I feel the weight of everything pressing down on me. The exhaustion, the resentment, the regret. It's suffocating. I feel like I'm drowning in it, and no matter how hard I try to fight my way to the surface, I just keep sinking deeper and deeper. I don't know what to do. I don't know if I can go back to that house, back to that life. The thought of walking through the door and facing my son after what he did tonight makes my stomach churn. The idea of trying to parent him, to be a father to a child who seems to hate me as much as I resent him, feels impossible. And it's not like I haven't tried. I've tried everything. I've read every parenting book, tried every technique, and poured every ounce of energy I had left into trying to make things work. But nothing has changed. Nothing has gotten better. And now I'm 45 years old, sitting alone in a parking lot, crying because I don't know how to fix the life I've ruined. I don't want advice. I've heard it all before. You need to discipline him more. You need to be more patient. Have you tried therapy? I've heard it all, and I've tried it all. None of it has worked. None of it has changed anything. This isn't about bad parenting or a lack of discipline. This is just my life, and it's miserable. Maybe I should have listened to my gut all those years ago. Maybe I should have trusted myself when I said I didn't want kids. But I didn't. I let other people convince me that I could do it, that I could be a good dad, that everything would be fine, and now here I am, paying the price for my weakness. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll go back to that house tonight, or if I'll sit here in this parking lot until the sun comes up. All I know is that I feel lost, broken, and filled with regret. I've lost control of my life, and I don't know if I'll ever be able to get it back. The silence in the car is deafening, and the weight of my thoughts presses down on me harder than ever. I've always thought that with time, things would get better, that maybe, just maybe, my son would grow out of this defiant phase, and we'd finally reach some semblance of normalcy. But here we are, 11 years in, and nothing has changed. If anything, it's only gotten worse. And now, I'm left wondering how much more I can take before I completely break. There's a part of me that feels guilty for even thinking these things. What kind of parent admits that they hate their own child? What kind of father drives away from his house because he can't stand to be around his family anymore? I've always imagined that good parents, real parents, don't feel this way. They don't sit in parking lots late at night, crying over the life they chose. They love their kids unconditionally, no matter how hard things get. But that's not me. That's never been me. I resent my son, my wife, my in-laws, and most of all myself. I resent everyone who convinced me that this was the right choice, that this was the path I was supposed to take. I resent the fact that I let them talk me into it, that I didn't have the courage to stand up for what I really wanted. I resent the way my life has turned out, and I hate that I'm stuck in a situation I can't change. But deep down, I know that the real blame lies with me. I was weak. I let myself be pushed into a life I never wanted, and now I'm paying the price. My son didn't ask to be born. He didn't ask to be raised by a father who never truly wanted him. It's not his fault that I resent him. It's mine. I created this mess, and now I have to live with it. I think about all the times I've tried to make things work, all the effort I've put into trying to be a good father, despite how I really feel. I think about the times I've pushed down my resentment, forced myself to smile, to play the part of the doting dad. But no matter how hard I've tried, it's never been enough. My son knows. He's always known. Maybe that's why he acts out the way he does. Maybe that's why he's so angry, so defiant. He's angry at the world, and he's angry at me. He knows I don't love him the way a father should love his child, and that knowledge has shaped him into the person he is today. He's lashing out because he's hurt, because he's been raised in a home where he's never truly been wanted. And as much as I want to blame him for everything, I know that part of his behavior is on me. I created this environment. I set the stage for this nightmare. And now, I don't know how to fix it, or if it can even be fixed. I think back to when I first agreed to have a child, how everyone promised that it would be worth it, that the love I'd feel for my kid would outweigh the sacrifices, how they said being a parent was the most rewarding thing in the world. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that somehow I'd feel that same connection, that same joy. But it never came. I never felt the overwhelming love that other parents talked about. Instead, I felt trapped. I feel like I've been trapped in this life for so long that I don't even know who I am anymore. I don't recognize the person I've become. I used to be happy, or at least content with the life I had before all of this. I used to have dreams, ambitions, a sense of purpose. Now all of that feels so distant, like it belongs to someone else, like I've lost myself in the endless grind of trying to raise a kid I never wanted. The guilt washes over me again, and I feel the tears threatening to return. I'm a failure, not just as a father, but as a person. I failed to stand up for myself, to live the life I truly wanted. I failed to create a healthy environment for my son, and now I'm stuck in this limbo, unable to move forward, but too broken to go back. I know I'll eventually have to go home. I'll have to face my wife, my son, and the life I've created. But right now, I can't. Right now, I just need to sit here in this parking lot and let the silence surround me. I need to mourn the life I thought I'd have and come to terms with the reality I'm living. Maybe tomorrow, I'll have the strength to face it all again. Maybe tomorrow I'll be able to go home and pretend, at least for a little while longer, that I can do this, that I can keep going, even though every part of me wants to run. But for tonight, I'll sit here in the dark and try to make sense of the mess my life has become. And maybe, just maybe, I'll find the courage to start over, to figure out what I really want, and to finally stop letting other people dictate the course of my life. But for now, I'll just sit here, in the dark, in the silence,